this world who'd be heartbroken over it. Even if it was a few, they were precious. Asuna, Argo, Agile, Kirito, I thought, as the chopper came down. Beat this game. Beat it, and go home. I thought it was over, then, suddenly the chopper stopped, and Po turned around. Huh, what is Sonic Leap? X. Pav, Kirito. Sonic Leap, I yelled, the sword skill springing to life just before the chopper was able to end Akira's life. It slammed into the larger man's weapon and sent him spiraling back. I swung my sword in an arc, and it made the other two wisely back off. I spotted Yolko and Keynes, who had helped Schmidt off the ground after paralysis had worn off. They were a safe distance away, and all I had to do now was trust in Asuna to find Grimlock. Kirito, Akira croaked from the ground, and I turned to see him just barely getting up to his feet. He met my eyes, and I saw he was crying. I'm sore. We can talk later, here, I said, tossing the potion I had in my hand over to him. He gritted his teeth and caught the potion. While he downed it, he rose to his feet, and his HP bar, which had less than 100 points left a minute ago, rose back up into the yellow zone. I kept my sword out and ready and watched him go through his inventory to the weapons screen. A few seconds later, the black bow of fate disappeared from his hands, and a rapier appeared. It didn't look as powerful as say Asuna's. But without hesitation he stood next to me with his sword at the ready. Kirito, he yelled, and I heard what he saw a second later. I spun and deflected the poison knife and activated another sword skill. I cut across the knife-wielding man's arm, and kicked him forward, just as the two remaining members of Laughing Coffin closed in. The one with a red, blood estoc went to cut Akira in half, but with amazing quickness, and impressive sword skills, Akira parried the attacks and lashed out with his own. His rapier glowing green with a sword skill. I scoffed with a smile. Looks like you can do more than just shoot. He laughed with his beaten face and fell back into place next to me. Yeah, that's thanks to Asuna really, we should. A loud growl came from the man with the chopper, and I lashed out to block just as Akira did the same with two more men from his left. For a few seconds the man's chopper bared down on me, and I fended him off. I tried to find room for an opening, but his defense was incredible, and he moved quick despite being so massive. I spun out of the way of an attack but another came right after, but thankfully Akira was there. He knocked the chopper aside and saved my life. And that went on for a while longer. Despite the fight being possibly deadly for both of us, I felt good. I trusted the person fighting at my back, and I could see he trusted me. Another ally I trusted was out finishing off the mission we set out to complete. I had almost forgotten what it was like after playing solo for so long. It felt pretty great. Kirito, where's Asuna? Akira yelled, knocking away the one Mons estoc and readying a sword skill. Star Splash. Arg. The man with the estoc yelled, being blasted back by the 8-point combo coming from his rapier. I recognized that skill. He must have gotten it from Asuna. She's out searching for Grimlock, I said, as he landed next to me again. She'll. Both of you die. The man with the chopper yelled, rushing forward, and going to bring the weapon down on me. Akira tried to come and help, but he got accosted by the other two members. I sidestepped the chopper and lashed back out, cutting across the massive man's arm, and readying my next sword skill. I put the power into my legs and leapt. Sonic Leap, I yelled, before my sword came down onto his chopper. I heard a crack, but the man held firm, and then I heard Akira. Star Splash, he yelled, rushing in under me while I was in the air, and his entire 8-point combo smashed into the man's stomach. He screamed and got sent flying back. Just as the other two members of Laughing Coffin rushed to his air, he slammed against a tree, his HP bar slipping into the red. That's it, Akira yelled, his eyes wide, his body bruised. I'm ending this, right now all. Huh, Kirito. I held my hand over his chest to stop him. No, Akira, we're done here. What? He said, tears and sweat running down his cheeks. Asuna must have told you, don't you understand? They killed. She has a plan. Don't worry, I said, turning now to Laughing Coffin, as their boss, the man with the chopper, pushed himself to his feet. We got backup on the way. 30 members of the assault team, do you really want to fight them all? Akira was seething next to me, but I didn't feel like it was anger. He looked back from me to Laughing Coffin, to me and back to Laughing Coffin, tears welling in the corner of his eyes, his hands turning white from the tight grip on his rapier. A very small part of me wanted to try and finish them off, but we had no idea what they were really capable of, or if they had any extra members nearby. My HP was also dropped to the yellow, near the red, and even after I'd given him one, Akira's was just starting to enter the red zone. It was like Asuna had said, we needed to get everyone to safety first, that was the priority. He didn't say anything, only looking at me as I narrowed my eyes at Laughing Coffin. Well, what's it going to be? The massive one gripped tight on his chopper. First he glared at me, then at Akira, before shaking his head and slinging the chopped onto his back. This isn't over, kid, he said, before turning to the other members. Come on, let's go. You, rewrite this isn't over. Akira yelled, trying to rush towards them. Akira, I said, grabbing him and pulling him back. I expected to have a much harder time holding him back than I did, but he was weak from the fight, and only gripped onto my arms, looking towards Laughing Coffin as they walked away. It doesn't matter where you hide. Akira yelled, his fingers digging into me as I held him in place. I'll find you. You'll get what's coming. Po. Zaza. It doesn't matter if it's AINCRAD of the real world. I'll find you, and one day you'll pay for this. I turned, and saw one member of Laughing Coffin turn, the one with a skull mask. Zaza, I remembered the name. You're right. This won't end between us, he said, pulling his hood further down. One day, you'll fall to my blade. Akira. It was the first time I ever heard a member of Laughing Coffin mention someone's name. I looked at Akira, who stopped struggling in my arms, only gripping hard to my sleeve as he watched Laughing Coffin leave. The sun was beginning to slowly rise, but the white mist of the forest settled in. An uneasy feeling passed through my chest, as I watched the mist envelope Laughing Coffin, and Akira shook until they finally disappeared. It looks like that's that. It's over for now, I said with a sigh, looking down at Akira, whose eyes had fallen to the ground, his grip still tight on my sleeve. Akira. You okay? I'm sorry, he said, his entire body shaking now. I heard him sob, as he slowly fell to his knees, looking off into the mist. Kirito, I'm sorry for not telling. You don't need to apologize, I said, falling down to my knees next to him. He looked up at me as I did, and I smiled at him. Now Asuna, you may need a few apologies. But, I get it, I've been thinking about it more. Thinking? About what? He said through tears. I sighed and stood back up, offering him my hand. What I would have done if Sugu had been stuck in here like your sister was. If I had my family killed in this game. And well, I may have done the same. He looked at my hand, and then back up to my eyes. He was still crying, but I saw a small smile come to his face. Wiping his tears, he shakily sighed and took my hand. I helped him up and he shook his head. I should have told you and Asuna about this. I just didn't want you both to risk yourselves and me. Well, I thought maybe it would finally stop hurting if I either died or if I shook my head. No matter how many people you may lose, you got no choice but to go on living, no matter how devastating the blows may be. Your sister, your girlfriend, I'm sure they wanted you to live. Focus on that. I laughed when he looked taken aback. Just be sure if you ever got a quest like this you may need to go on again, ask Asuna for help. Me too. He scoffed, and wiped the last of the tears, meeting my eyes again. That sound like a plan. Kirito. I wanna live now. At least so I can get Asuna back to the real world. And so you can get back to see your sister again. I didn't expect what he did next. I watched as he maneuvered through his menus, and a few seconds later, a message appeared in my own window. Akira has sent you a friend request, do you accept? Chuckling, I pressed the green check. I didn't have many of them, my friends list was pretty small. But it had been one of the easiest decisions I made in this game. We'll beat this game, I said, as the confirmation appeared, and I held out a fist for him. But before we do that, we'll have to work on those sword skills. He scoffed and bumped my fist. You sound like Asuna. Yeah, I guess as good as I am with a bow. It is called Sword Art Online. I'll have to figure something out. I winced at the mention of Asuna. Speaking of Asuna, she's mad, isn't she? He asked, as we both went to walk back to the tree that Yolko and her guild had been left at. I nodded. Oh yeah, big time. But I think she's more so worried. Understandable, he said, looking down at his beaten hands. Alright, let's get moving. X. So, it really was Grimlock, Yolko said, looking to Akira. Akira, how did you know? Akira shrugged, his arms crossed. Argo got me the information. I'm sorry you had to go through this. I was trying to catch you before our meeting with Schmidt to tell you. Kirito. Akira, Schmidt said, still stiff from the paralysis as he looked between Akira and me. Thank you for saving me. Was this really Grimlock who ordered this? I nodded. Yeah, he was the one who had Griselda killed. Probably the same way too, he hired Laughing Coffin. But it doesn't make sense. Kane said, shaking his head. Why wait to do it now after all of this time to try and kill us? Because you started digging into Griselda's death, Akira told them, shaking his head. I realized something was up after I heard his name from Argo in connection to Laughing Coffin. You both went to him for weapons, right? Told him about your plan. He didn't want any details possibly getting out and linking him to it. So, they waited for you all to be in the same place and... Yolko trembled and looked at Akira. I can't believe it. Akira, Kirito thank you. Akira did. Kya, were they really the ones too? Yeah, my sister too, he said, the mist slowly swirling around the group of them. I should be the one apologizing to you all, if I had been up front first. If I had told you all what I knew, then this could have been avoided. No, we should apologize as well, Yolko said, looking at Kanes, and then back to the two of us. We were going to come clean after it was all done, we promise. Yeah, we're sorry, Kanes said, as I could see the night starting to make way to the morning time. But, what about Grimlock? Where could he be now? I found him, Asuna's voice cut in, and while I turned around right away, I could see Akira hesitate too. He wasn't hiding very far away. I saw Asuna had found Grimlock, who wore a long white coat. Her rapier was pointed at his back, and he made no moves to resist as she urged him forward. Akira looked nervous next to me. After Asuna got closer, he finally sighed and still looking upset himself finally met Asuna's eyes, who sure enough was glaring at him. Hey, Asuna, he said, shaking his head. I'm sore. We will talk in a minute, she said, not even looking at him. I could hear how hurt she was as she poked Grimlock again. Go on. I saw Akira's face fall again, and I couldn't help but feel bad for him and Asuna both. On one hand I couldn't blame Asuna for being angry, on the other, I couldn't blame Akira for doing what he'd done. I sighed, as I watched Grimlock chuckle, his glasses glossed over with fog as he looked towards his old guild. Hello, my friends, the tall man said, looking at the group of them. Sorry about the unfortunate circumstances. Grimlock, Yolko said, as Kanes and Schmidt both looked furious. Is what they said true? Are you really responsible for Griselda's death? Grimlock had the nerve to look upset about it. It's true. You go poking around, didn't you, Yolko? How could you do that? Kanes demanded. How could you kill your own wife like that? And for what, Grimlock? Yolko demanded. All over money. Money for that stupid ring. Money. Grimlock suddenly hissed, and I saw Asuna poke her rapier into his back again as he shook his head. No, you think I'd do something like this for money? No, I did it to save my wife. Griselda and I, we were married in the real world. The revelation seemed to shock Yolko and her guild. It only made me angrier, but it was nothing compared to Akira. That makes it even worse, he said, and I could see tears welling again as he stepped in front of the man. You murdered someone who trusted you, who loved you. How could you do something like that? She was your connection back to the real world. You of all people should understand, Akira. You were married in this death game to your perfect woman, he said, but before he could say anything else Akira had grabbed him by the shirt collar. Don't you dare compare the two of us, he said, tossing the man to the ground. Don't compare what you did to what happened to Kya. Grimlock laughed from the ground. But she was the perfect woman for you, like Griselda was for me, before this world. You and Kya, see, you were the same people before, and after you were trapped here, it was different for Griselda and I. What are you spewing on about? Akira said, and I could see just how angry he was becoming now. Grimlock groaned and stood. Before Went entered this world, Griselda, she was the perfect wife, pretty, kind, obedient. We never had a single fight. But the moment we became trapped in this game, she changed. She was meant for this world, like you and Kya were meant for it, Akira. Akira's fist trembled, and I had to step forward and grab his arm before he threw a punch and started another fight. His HP still was dangerously low, and I didn't know what Grimlock had up his sleeve. I pulled him back, and over towards Asuna, who still had her rapier out, her eyes narrowed towards Grimlock. I saved her, Grimlock said, looking around at us now. I let her life end while she was still the woman I knew, before this game changed her. I saved Ga. This time, I hadn't been able to stop Akira. He threw a punch faster than I could see, and it connected, because Grimlock fell to the ground, his HP bar going down a good chunk from just an unarmed attack. Akira lumbered over him. You sick man. You think what you felt was love. If it had been love, you would have done anything to protect it. You would have protected her with. Tears came again, and I was about to go to try and say something, but I finally saw Asuna, who had been looking at Akira, step out from behind Grimlock. She grabbed onto Akira's wrist and stared at the man. Akira's right, you're wrong, she said, one of her glares directed at the man. What you felt, what you thought you felt, wasn't love for your wife, it was nothing but disgusting possessiveness. Grimlock, who had already been on the ground, looked down at his hands. I didn't know what the man could have been realizing in that moment, but his hands began to shake. I saw tears begin to well in his eyes, but I was more focused on Akira, who was doing the same. He looked at Asuna, who was doing her best to still look angry, but after a moment she looked at her friend, and a small smile came to her face. I sighed with relief. At least that was one thing taken care of. Grimlock started to whimper. I'd seen this happen more than a few times. The realization was finally setting in for him, the weight of what he had done finally seemed to be hitting him. I'm sure it would happen to me one day, like it happened to every player in this death game at least once. If we ever did make it out of the game, I'm sure it would happen even more. Near the massive tree, just as the sun began to slowly rise again, I looked and saw Yolko, Keynes and Schmidt all look at each other. Finally, they all nodded. Moving through the mist, they made their way over to Grimlock. Schmidt looked over at Asuna, Akira and I, before bowing. Kirito, Akira, Asuna, he said as he bowed. Allow us to take care of this. Sure, I said with a nod, followed by Asuna and Akira both. Schmidt nodded, before moving to help Keynes. They both picked up the groveling Grimlock, one arm around each of their shoulders, before turning away. Yolko was the last one to join their group. The purple-haired girl had a smile and bowed to us again, before looking over at Akira. Akira. If you ever need anything, any of you, she said, as she bowed, please, be sure to call on us. We'll see you in the real world if we don't hear. I bowed back to them and waved as Yolko did. After that, I watched them take Grimlock off into the woods. The mist soon moved around them, and they disappeared somewhere onto the map. I sighed in relief as I did. This whole situation had gotten me worked up and had been making me think more and more about how I played this game. A part of it made me think about going to join a guild, becoming close with people like I'd seen here. Another part of it made me want to stay playing solo, so I didn't lose what these people had lost. Still, was that even possible anymore? Of course, I'd play solo, but could I really say that I didn't have people I cared about anymore? What Akira had been saying, about his sister, about the pain he'd felt, it scared me. It scared me because I knew what I still had waiting for me in the real world. Sugu. My mother, father, everyone who had worked to raise me. I had promised Akira I'd make it back, to fix things with Sugu, to live the life I wanted to live. But I had even more of a reason now, and what he said reminded me of it. Saki. All the people I'd lost, I'd clear the game for them. It would be because I knew the ones lost believed in me. And now, it would be for Akira to get his second chance at life, so Asuna could go home. For all the people who had sacrificed like Akira had to get us to this point. You idiot. I heard Asuna yell from behind me, and I turned just in time to see Asuna relentlessly punching Akira's arms. You promised me. Do you have any idea how worried I was? I'm sorry. Akira pleaded, trying to protect himself. Both were crying. I almost felt like I was intruding. I saw Akira shakily sigh after the assault ended. I know I told you I wouldn't try and hunt them anymore, but Asuna I had to. No, it's not even that, she said, crossing her arms and glaring at him, trying clearly to hold back the tears that wanted to escape. I don't even care anymore that you still tried to find them. I just can't believe you didn't think you could come to me. Come to me and ask for my help when you were going to do something like this. We're supposed to be teammates, Akira, partners. I wanted to step in and tell Asuna she was being a little harsh, but I decided against it quickly. I shifted towards them, trying to not interrupt. Finally, Akira, who couldn't meet Asuna's eyes anymore, looked down at his feet. I'm sorry I worried you, he said, his voice small, as he didn't look up. I thought that you would try to stop me. Stop you from recklessly throwing your life away, she said, taking another step closer to him, and punching him again, this time leaning against him. You're damn right I would have tried to stop you. Do you know how I would blame myself if you died? I already watched Kya and your sister die. I won't let it happen to you. We promised we'd be there together when this game was clear, you promised Akira. How could you risk yourself like this when you know how destroyed me and the rest of your friends would be? Asuna, I said, trying to defuse the situation now. I nearly jumped out of my skin when she turned and glared at me. I think he gets it. Come on, there's no. I didn't want to feel like this anymore, Akira said, and Asuna and I turned to see his tears falling down to the ground, before he fell to his knees. I'm sorry Asuna. I just didn't want to feel hurt like this. I didn't want to feel it anymore. Next to me, Asuna's glare softened, as she looked down at Akira on his knees. She had tears welled up in her eyes again as well, as she looked up to me, and then back down to Akira. Every single morning I wake up and I think it was a dream, he said, leaning forward on his hands, unable to look up. I expect to hear Aki coming in to wake me up. I expect to see Kya next to me and for a few minutes every morning, I think they'll be there. Akira-kun, Asuna said, kneeling in front of him. I felt a bit out of place for a minute, but soon I almost felt myself begin to tear up. It had been so long since I saw someone so vulnerable. I stood there, watching as Asuna held a hand on his shoulder, and Akira grabbed it. I miss them, Asuna. I miss them so much. He cried, his arms shaking as he knelt there on the ground, Asuna pulling him into a hug. I don't know how much longer I can take it. I let them die. Aki, she's never going to get to draw her manga. Kyashi, she'll never make the game she always wanted, all because I. Shish. It's okay, Asuna said, hugging him, and I even could feel tears spurting from my own eyes now as I stood and watched. I should have done more too. You don't have to carry the guilt alone. Aki. I was screaming at her before she died, he said, as I saw the three of us all were crying now. And Kyashi, she trusted me too. I had forgotten such emotions existed at this point. It had been months, almost a year since Saki and the Black Cats. I could remember being like this then, and they hadn't even been my real family. My hands shook at my sides, and I sucked in a sharp breath before wiping the tears from my own eyes that had started leaking. We'll do this for them. We will, Asuna said, pulling back from Akira with tears in her eyes, and meeting his eyes again as he finally looked up. As a team, together. I promise. We'll do it together. We will. Yeah, she's right, I said, and both turned to look at me as I took another step forward. I shook my head and managed a smile. I may be a solo player but if either of you ever have need of me, you can count on me, we can count on each other. Asuna's face got a little red, and I tried to keep my own from doing the same. She smiled and nodded, before looking down at Akira. Akira shakily laughed and shook his head. I just gotta remember what you said. Kirito, he said to me, looking up and meeting my eyes with his watery ones. They believed in me. That's what I'll focus on. You said that, Asuna said, wiping her tears as she smiled. That's very motivational, Kirito-kun. I didn't expect it from you. I chuckled nervously and turned around. Well, I try. I guess we should be. I froze, my mouth going dry, when I saw what I saw under the tree then. The sun had just rose, it casted the tree's shadow over the three of us, and just as I felt the heat begin to hit my skin, was when I saw the two people. Two girls, one as tall as me, with long flowing red hair, a kind smile, bright green eyes, and the same exact armor that Akira had on. She had her arm around a young girl, she seemed even younger than Silica. She had two bright blonde braids going down her back, a hyperactive smile, and bright blue eyes that looked really familiar. Because they were the same as Akira. Asuna must have noticed, because I saw her stand and shake Akira. Akira-kun. I watched as Akira, who was still on his knees, turned between the two of us, and when he looked up and saw the two of them, his mouth fell open, and he struggled to form words for a minute. Aki, he said slowly at first, looking between the two shadows. Kya, Aki. Kya what? How? I. The little girl's ghost, shadow, soul, whatever it was, stepped forward, and flashed a massive smile towards Akira, holding out a two-fingered peace sign. Remember big brother, she said in a cheerful voice, smiling over at Akira. Go and live with your head held high. No matter how devastated you may be with your own weakness or foolishness, set your heart ablaze. Akira, whose tears had returned, scoffed a laugh, and I felt I'd heard the words before. But he clearly recognized them, a smile coming to his face. The girl giggled and kept smiling. Grit your teeth and look straight ahead. Even if you stop and crouch down, the time won't wait for you, or snuggle and grieve along with you. Don't cry, big brother, she said, her smile growing as she laughed, just keep moving forward with your heart set ablaze. Aki, he said, a mixture of a smile and tears on his face as he sobbed. His eyes turned to the pretty girl next to the girl. Kya, I'm sore. The girl shook her head, a pretty smile on her face. There's something worse in life than being sad, Akira. It's being alone and being sad. She looked up next, to me and Asuna. My eyes widened and I looked across to see Asuna crying as she looked at the two. And thankfully you're not alone. You'll look after him for us, won't you? She said, first looking at Asuna with her kind smile. Asuna-chan, next she turned to me with that smile, Kirito-kun. Asuna sniffled, and wiped tears from her eyes. I will. I promise. Kya-chan. Yeah, I said, looking at the girl, then down to Akira. I promise too. Kya nodded, her pretty smile still prevalent as it looked down at Akira once more, and then she put an arm around Aki. For the two of you, Akira said, crying as his eyes went back down to the ground. I'll end this. I'll win. End this world. Akira. And then go live, Kya said, and I finally looked over at Akira, kneeling down to hold a hand on his shoulder. Asuna did the same, but when we all looked up, Kya and Aki were gone. I could feel my mind going a mile a minute. That definitely was. Yeah, it was, she said, wiping tears from her eyes again, and looking back down to Akira, whose fingers had dug into the ground. Akira-kun. Are you, huh? She stopped. When Akira started laughing. He still cried, yes, tears still fell, but he laughed and sat up on his knees, looking at the spot his sister and girlfriend had been. Demon Slayer. He said simply, sniffling and wiping tears from his eyes. Demon Slayer? Asuna asked, looking at me now. I scoffed and looked at Akira, holding out a hand for him. I thought that quote sounded familiar. What are you talking about? Asuna said, holding out her hand as well. Akira laughed again, and took both their hands, his eyes still watery when he got up and looked at us both. What Aki said. It was a quote from Rengoku in Demon Slayer Volume 8, he said, wiping his eyes one more time. That was her favorite manga and anime, she could quite most of it word for word. Aki she wanted to write and draw her own one day. Maybe. After we get out of here, Asuna said with a smile. You can make it for her. Akira scoffed, before taking in a deep breath. Yeah, maybe, I'll have to find someone to draw though, I'm horrible at it. But we have to get out of here first. He took a step forward, before turning around to face us both, finally smiling. But if I'm gonna be of any use, I'm gonna need to brush up on my sword skills, and maybe find a better one of my own. What did the two of you say to teaching me? I felt my own heart set ablaze as I nodded. Yeah, you bet. Asuna laughed next to me. Ha, I thought you were a solo player, Kirito-kun. Have a chance of heart. I tensed up and shook my head. No, I just mean well, if you ever need it, I'll be happy to help. Awesome. You can help by buying us some food, she said, before her glare and smirk turned to Akira. And Akira-kun will help you pay for it. I never got to finish my meal before we had to go and save you after all. Akira chuckled nervously. Haha. Yeah, I guess I do owe you. What do you say, Kirito? I looked at them both, and something that oftentimes I felt low on started welling up in my chest. Hope. Sighing, I nodded at them both. Alright, let's go. We only got another few days till the next boss raid. We'll need a full stomach for it. Thanks for watching part 3 of Akira's Arrow. Hope you enjoyed, and if you did then I hope you will like, comment, and subscribe for more.